Okay.
All right.
All right, let's get started. So thanks everybody for those of you coming back. It's awesome to see you again. For the newbies, welcome. We hope this is going to be a good session for you. We're doing this every week at 11. So all of our past presentations are live on the Perks at Work site, so you can take a look. We were going to start, in every session we start by looking at the prior week's feedback. So we did that. We're not going to pull it up, but we got some feedback. We thought stepping back a little bit in this session. Some of you have actually seen a presentation we call the 100-year change. This 100-year change we've been in and has been kind of magnified by COVID. So we're going to spend a few minutes on the 100-year change, a little bit of theory before we dive in to some more of the pieces that we want to teach around resiliency training. And there's other stuff we want to cover in here we think you're going to like. But we're also going to dive into some practical tips right at the end. We've been asked for some practical tips for how to, just how to handle this whole situation at a family level, at a team level, how to stay, engage and build relationships virtually and over VTC. So there's a lot of different practical tips we want to share with you at the end. This happens to also be a presentation we're sharing with about 5,000 people at 1 o'clock for the federal student aid, which is they do all the student loans and grants for college education. So the head of that used to be in the Air Force, asked us to come and speak to his whole staff today. So we're going to share some of that. We have a lot we want to share. Obviously, we're not going to share exactly everything we want to share there, but we're going to try to take you guys through this. We think it will be really interesting for you. And we will have some time for Q&A at the end, hopefully 10, 15 minutes if I do my job right in editing and we stick to our plan. So I think with that, we'll kick off.
So you guys can see my screen, right? Thumbs up? Yes. So we thought we'll kill two birds with one stone, which is why it says FSA. It literally will be used now or later. But I'm going to talk really quickly about this 100-year change. And I love some of the people here from education. This slide I'm going to walk you through quick. It's fascinating because we first shared this slide 5 years ago. It's almost 6 years ago, in 2015. One of the benefits and privileges we've had in running our pro bono work on leadership academies and helping different organizations at a pro bono basis is in the last decade, we've just met the who's who of people. And two of the groups that were interesting is the best educators of educators come from either Stanford or Harvard University. They have the best education schools in the world. And we learned this origin of a 100-year change that's occurring, and that change starts dating way back to 1750, when King Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, actually is the one who invented public schools. And it's fascinating because the reason he invented public schools was he met with his advisors and said, I want to create a training ground that would produce the most loyal subjects to the king. And as they sat and discussed, they basically came out with two principles. If they bake these principles into public schools, it will lead to the most obedient subjects to the king: isolation and fear. And if you go to public schools still, why desks are isolated, from each other for students. At the same time, there's changing of teachers and students all the time, so that you can't build and forge relationships very easily. Fear is baked in. Students fear teachers, teachers fear principals, principals fear superintendents. And yet this was a most ideal way to build a training ground, which is public schools, that produce the most loyal subjects to the king. Well, fast forward, in this case, a little more than 100 years, by 1920, a guy by the name of Cubberley in the United States said that that old methodology does not work anymore, because there's a new need in work. And the new need is that we need assembly line workers. We don't need loyal subjects to the king. We need people who can follow directions and work the assembly line, great followers. And he upgraded the principles in public schools to be compliance and uniformity. Compliance is another word for rules. There's a rule for everything. And you think about it, and there's an issue of anything, people say, well, what's the rule for decision making? Oh, sorry. If you can mute yourself, Laurie, I'm going to mute you. It'll help us.
Okay.
So rule for decision making, rule for this, there's a rule for everything, right? So rule books came in everywhere. And then uniformity is everyone did the same thing, right? And you think about schools, you're moving it down an assembly line of, now I start the morning doing reading, then I move into math, then I move into science, and then everyone recess,
That's
right?
hard.
And then
You
everyone
know,
goes
yeah.
to, some other
Yeah.
class, and you're moving down an assembly line, never sure how one subject connects to another. And literally schools got built exactly the same way that would train and produce the best assembly line workers, followers. Now, fast forward into the 21st century. And by the way, note this occurred in 1920. And I say 1920 because this is 20% of the way into a new century. The industrial age, or the 20th century, actually started at 1900 and went to Y2K 2000. And at the 20% mark is when the old model broke apart. They had to upgrade it. And usually by the time schools were changing, work already had led the charge. So I mentioned this because 5 years ago, in 2015, Megan and I were talking for the last 5 years saying, if history has any prediction of the future, by 2020, the same thing would occur. This 100-year change in the 21st century, right, the information age would show up where at the 2020 mark, year 2020, the old model will break apart and then a new model will be created as a result. We started to do a lot of work with some of the most cutting edge charter schools, preschools, and we found that the new principles they focused on was creativity and collaboration. And these two things, when done together, is what most people call innovation. Creativity is making something that did not exist. And the most powerful machine, the most powerful entity that can create something that didn't exist before is actually human beings. That when done as a team is when it's most powerful. When we started to look at the most cutting edge companies and what they were focused on and the research, and there's many different groups we've met with over the years, basically work is not producing products and or services anymore. Work produces decision makers. And the best workplaces is literally a decision-making factory. Every single person is getting better at their judgment calls, their decisions. And when that's done well, we put the word teaming here, it happens in a collaborative fashion. And it's fascinating. I was reading this thing last night I sent to Megan saying, so who's changing your organization's digital transformation? Who's leading your organization's digital transformation? It was a survey of A, the CEO, B, the CTO, or C, COVID. COVID has forced an acceleration of all of us needing to learn how to work at a digital level in a way that I think was unprecedented. So when we had predicted this, we never thought starting in January that the move to 2020 would occur through a pandemic and accelerate what occurred. Now, when we think about organizations as decision-making machines, there are two parts of decision-making. The bigger part people forget about is sense-making, making sense of what's happening, especially when there's a term the military uses called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex, or complex and ambiguous, VUCA. Making sense of things when it's changing and complicated as hell. I think right now in the world, there's more questions than answers. Right? How long will this go? When do we do next? When do we go back to work? I mean, are we going to run out of food? I mean, there's questions everywhere. Sense making is inherently human. We try to make sense of it. And in practical terms, it shows up as giving and getting advice. Oftentimes when we verbalize what we've made sense of, we often will either give or even get advice, oftentimes giving it to ourselves as well, giving it to other people. And based on how we make sense of things, it leads to decision-making or judgment calls. The bottom part is kind of what we use. Now we think about sensors and you drive and use GPS. Computers and machines and big data has provided us tremendous sensors to understand what's happening from the machine point of view. But one of the things that we always think about is why do we have so many meetings? Why do companies and organizations constantly have meetings? The main reason leaders have meetings is trying to find signal when they're not sure. It's trying to find the human voice, human sensors collectively as a team to assess the situation. And if you could read the minds of every human being on your team, the combination of machine sensor data, big data, combined with your collective human sensors will give you near perfect decision-making skills as an organization. And organizations that make a lot of the right calls in a row tend to succeed no matter what. Organizations that make usually a series of wrong calls, they usually say it takes one traumatic wrong call, which is like a fumble in a football game, but that never really loses the game. It's the series of 6 errors that follow the fumble that makes someone lose the game. You'll see in organizations, bad calls start to actually come spiraling down in large numbers. And that's what actually can kill an organization or even individuals. Most decisions and most outcomes require 7 or more calls in a row, right or wrong, before you innovate or before you see a major accident. And so the game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It's fascinating. There are 3 lifelines they always have. It's 50-50. You can get rid of one of the 2 of the 4 choices. There's phone a friend or poll the audience. The most effective lifeline, which almost consistently has the right answer, is poll the audience. It's never 100% right, but it's surprising the level of accuracy. The majority of the people know what is the right answer. So just really quick, some practical examples. This is going back to 1979. We spent time with a guy named Barry Gentz. He's a Harvard professor who's in his 70s now, but 40 years ago, he was brought in to analyze what happened, the largest and the only nuclear meltdown that ever occurred in US soil. And what he found was actually a pretty straightforward answer. He found that 5 people, if they had talked to each other, they would have prevented this nuclear meltdown. When sense-making isn't occurring, the term in research is called organizational silence. People are quiet. They don't speak up. They don't speak up because they don't have full knowledge. We always talk about the notion of puzzling. You know the old adage of don't bring me a problem unless you have a solution? Well, what happens if the problem itself is like a puzzle and no one person has all the pieces of the puzzle? Unless you're able to put your pieces down on the table so someone else can see, oh my God, I have some blue pieces as well. When we combine the pieces, you start to make sense of what is happening. But it takes courage for someone to speak up, and people don't. And the most common form of hostility we will face anywhere in our lives is actually silence. I use the example, if you ever go to a dinner party and you can hear the clinking of the forks on the plates, it's not very comfortable. And that is what occurs in most of our organizations at work. Another example, obviously Boeing, right? So this is 40 years after what Barry Gentz had found. Amy Edmondson, another Harvard professor we know well, she was brought in, she got well known for organizational silence. Psychological safety. She papered a document many years ago on psychological safety and the need for it to speak up. It's not about like having it be all cushy. It's just that like there needs to be a level of psychological safety to be able to speak up and say difficult things. Analyzing Boeing between different departments as they saw things that were incorrect, what we call an NQR, not quite right, they didn't speak up. And the sum total of different departments not speaking up led to 2 fatal crashes back to back. Once again, no voice, right? The silence of the voice leading to bad decisions. On the flip side, there's a fun example. We did a lot of work with the CIA and still do a lot of work with them, helping them. And we spent time with the lead analyst who helped capture Osama bin Laden. Now the CIA, one of the most powerful organizations using technology and sensors and money and bribery, they could not find this one guy for the longest time. And what I love in the story was this: the CIA had the humility to go and seek out advice, the opinion of another group. And they said in history, did any group ever struggle to find something so significant? In this case, they went to the original team that discovered the Titanic and they asked them for advice. The CIA went to the team that found the Titanic and asked for advice of how they found the Titanic. And what they learned and what the Titanic team shared was that we all have biases, blind spots, and assumptions we make. The assumption in the Titanic, like the movie, was that it broke into 2 giant pieces and the whole world looked for 2 giant pieces of a ship. Once they challenged that assumption and said, what happened if it broke into 1,000 little pieces? They found the Titanic almost instantly. As soon as the CIA spent time getting advice and help from this team, they found Osama bin Laden almost instantly. Now I share this because I know many of us in different organizations focused on the notion of diversity. When we talk about the small d in diversity, the small d is tied to race, gender, age. The big D in diversity is diversity of thinking. Now, diversity of thinking is something that we'll talk about because it comes down to conflict.
Disagreements.
So I'm going to shift really quick from some of that background, which is kind of much more in high level theory, to go to some levels of practice in application. And this is where there's such a large gap between theory to application. Oftentimes we take a break, but in this case, we'll give you a 5-second break and we'll move straight to application. So this busy slide here, we shared in last week's session. If you were there, and you can see the videos as well. So we took some of this language from the military and I love, so I'll just focus this idea of the people system map. Every one of us, we have people that run our organizations in different capacities. The word training versus education, the military uses this to distinguish between technical skills training versus soft skills leadership training. Education, in a lot of Fortune 1000 companies, they usually say you get technical training and then you get leadership training. Different words, but basically meaning you've got technical hard skills training separated from leadership soft skills training. Training tends to also break into jump starts, which is intense ways to train. A lot of times new hires, the onboarding process in the military, they have boot camps of all sorts. We have cultural indoctrination for new hire onboarding. You have offsites. Those are intense jump starts. Sometimes you go for like a 6 months or an MBA. That's a jump start to learn something as well. And then there's sustainment. Sustainment is around consistency. The term I love from the military is weekly and monthly battle rhythms. What are your rituals? What are those rhythms that you do consistently? So what we found in almost every organization is tremendous investments in their people, the number one asset, especially into the information age. We moved from machines being valuable, the most important asset in the industrial age, to the information age, where now people are the number one assets. Two check marks occurring for training and education in an intense jumpstart level. We cover the theory really well. When you look at the bottom half of the chart though, OJT stands for on-the-job training. We all receive on-the-job training. They are decentralized in nature, but on the technical side, they're structured. Structure is set, whether it could be certifications, it could be, a manager has to let you pass to certain stages and levels. And so in the technical side, whether you are, in Josh Hurt's case, he had to learn I think ejection seats of planes, right? Or like how to move airplane engines. Some of us learn Excel or PowerPoint, right? Different worlds, but we have different levels of training we receive on the technical side. However, when you look at leadership and think of leadership, and there's many definitions of leadership, but the two most important jobs of leadership we always think about is a leader has to make sense of things. They're constantly asked, what's happening next? What's going on around the corner? Can you explain to me what happened in the past? And then they are relied on to make the right calls, not once, but continuously. And the bar is very high for leadership. So we learn this in theory, but when you look at it in practice, and this is on-the-job training, it is decentralized, but there's virtually no structure. So Harvard University, going back 5+ years, did a study saying companies who put structure on the soft skills, not on a jumpstart basis, but on a continual sustainment basis, they even called it baked into their culture. They call these companies DDOs. They are deliberate of how they develop their people in these skills of leadership, in these soft skills. And then there's a flip side term we added as of last week called an ADO, accidental. When you look at different teams, and some teams run well and some teams don't, it's kind of accidental. It's accidental if you happen to have a manager who's a great leader. Most of us face the opposite accident, which is like kind of a horrible leader, horrible manager. There is virtually no training when it comes to, think of like when they have to run staff meetings, they have to run coaching sessions. The best you have is thinking of what was your worst and what was the best experience you had before. And then it's kind of like this soft passed down knowledge, almost like how, you know, elephants pass down where the watering holes are, like mother to calf or whatever it is. Like there's no structure, there's no training. There's virtually no instruction that we receive and no type of structure when it comes to on-the-job training of leadership, besides in theory. So this is the difference. And so when they did the study, they found 3 companies, and we were one of the 3 they found globally that were deliberate of building structure in educating your staff on a consistent level on soft skills, on leadership. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take you to part 2 of this, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit from there.
We're going to do a whiteboard from our iPad. So just let us know in a second if you can't see it, maybe with a thumbs down, but we're going to pull up the second part of this system map. Just 1 second.
Oh, sorry, I have to stop sharing this.
Okay. Okay, 1 second.
Give me 1 second. We're
You all still with us? Good so far? Okay, okay. It's going to get interesting.
I hope.
I hope. Well, you'll let us know if it's not.
By the way, Megan and I as co-CEOs, we tend to work as editor and reporter. So if I am,
it's a fancy way of him saying if it doesn't work out, it's my fault because the editor didn't do her job. But we're on track right now. We're at about 11:23. We're all right.
Okay.
Okay.
So what's interesting when we think about people, and this is where I will call this part 2, part 2 of the people system map. When it comes to people, the foundation of us almost always comes down to this word character. And you've probably heard of character spoken a lot, but rarely understood in practice, a lot in theory. So we spent a decade with some of the best in this space. And what we found was this: when it came to character, the mother of all character traits that mattered was actually 2 traits. One is confidence, and the other one was humility. And what we found was there wasn't one or the other that was important. You needed both. And every time we made bad judgment calls as human beings, it's when we were imbalanced in these traits. When you're overly confident and not humble enough, by definition, we call that arrogance. When you're overly humble and not confident enough, by definition, we call that insecurity. At the moment of stress, the confident person, the overly confident, the arrogant person will make an arrogant call, being too aggressive. The insecure person would be paralyzed and make no call. And so we found this consistency, where when you think of these things, there's the notion that confidence is oftentimes also closely related to courage, right? There's a lot of synonyms. Humility is not about being meek, but it's about being open-minded, open-mindedness. And we think about this even when I talked about the CIA, for them to have the humility to seek out the team that found the Titanic. I mean, an organization with the technology, satellite imagery, and firepower of the CIA. So you think about kind of the power of these traits. But there is something interesting we found as we dug deeper into this, which is, so there's a lot of similar traits underneath, and what matters most. So within humility, and you'll see this a lot right now because of COVID, resiliency comes up a lot. We need resiliency. You look at the definitions of resiliency. The Navy Vice Chief defined it to us as the ability to take a punch. Most of us think of physical resiliency, yet there's a term we got from a PhD in the Coast Guard, which was that 15% of us is body, 85% comes from the mind. And the mind is so hard to influence, we often start at the body and we try to transfer into the mind. But 85% of what we do as human beings is driven by our mind, by our narratives, our voice. Mental resiliency is actually where we will struggle even more than physical resiliency. Then there's number 2, and what we found that was the strongest and most important trait under humility was coachability. Coachability is having the humility to understand experience matters. Someone who has experienced something, able to mentor you, guide you, and coach you. can elevate your performance to higher levels. So under humility, these are the two things that mattered. And then when we looked at confidence, the very first thing we found, and we saw this a lot in schools because they were focused on helping children, they call it self-advocacy. Self-advocacy can...
Yeah, learning when to ask for help, right? Having respect for yourself, learning how to hold your ground when you feel something, right? Versus being able to be sort of pushed over. And then risk-taking.
And what's interesting about self-advocacy is this, with the creation of social media and the ability to pull the crowd and for everyone to tell you that's a dumb idea, we tend to have very few independent point of views. In fact, when we do have them, we just don't share them. We don't even recognize we're regurgitating what you read. The more input you have from Facebook and this and that, we're actually just regurgitating what everyone's saying as opposed to sharing your independent point of view. So the interesting part we found was this. As we're imbalanced, every one of us gets imbalanced. Which side of the imbalance shows up for us, for each of us? And this is the interesting thing we found that was backwards in practice than in theory. We found adults were imbalanced on this side, meaning they actually had more confidence, despite you thinking, I'm not a confident one, they had more confidence and lacked the skills to dial up humility. But we found kids had the opposite. Kids, and we do a lot of work with schools, we do a lot of work with kids ourselves, including even in this co-op program, kids were on the flip side. Schools were focused on providing kids grit and resiliency. When you think of the 100-year change, the industrial age school that was built, it was built because teachers, principals, superintendents, they love kids who follow instruction. They love kids who conform. They love kids who are good listeners and actually can take multi-step direction from an authority figure. And in that process, what we found was children actually lacked confidence. They lacked confidence, but there was something interesting we found as we dove deeper into this in children. The order of this matters. We found that this is actually number 2, and this is number 1. And in that process, if you're able to focus on number 1, it builds and leads you to actually get stronger in the other thing. There's something similar. I'll give you an example. We found that a lot of us as leaders are told you have to build more empathy. We found empathy is not something you can build in a direct path. If you practice vulnerability, as in sharing your challenges and struggles, you will build empathy for other people's challenges and struggles. In the same way, we found when it came to self-advocacy, if you learn the right ways and the skills and the muscle to risk take, you will build self-advocacy. In the same way, we found that if you are able to train and build resiliency, you become easier to coach. So we will take a screenshot of this. Good? Is there a question?
Yep. We okay? All right, we're going to take a screenshot of this and make sure this document gets up on the website as well. Make sure everybody gets it.
Okay, so
okay.
I'm going to go back really quick to the presentation. So I'm giving you that as the baseline for how we think of character. And I'm going to move to the adult side more, which is around resiliency. Bob Keegan was one of the top child psychologists, and then eventually became one of the top adult development. We went from child development to adult development. And a lot of us now, I think you probably are feeling at home in a state of, I can't do this anymore, right? The notion of burnout. And the burnout is oftentimes seen as one of the most extreme forms of unhappiness. And this is what the research says, that the single biggest cause of burnout is not work overload. It's not working long hours, but it's being too long in a work setting without experiencing growth, without experiencing further unfolding. Said another way, you know, human beings or organisms, we're organic. This is what growth looks like, right? But what happens if you ever see a plant that looks like this? Have you seen someone stuck in their careers? Imagine if they told you, we're going to freeze your salary for the next 5 years. Your job title will stay the exact same, right? Your knowledge and what you know will stay frozen. And when you see a plant that looks like this at the bottom, people usually say something's not quite right. I think they're rotten or dead underneath.
Something at the root. Yeah.
When we think about human beings, the fact is once you are born until you die, we're always moving. And what's happening is we're either getting worse or we're getting better. And there are two elements of this. When you're getting worse and worse, it leads you to a place. And by the way, being stuck and staying, no, you know what? I'm not getting better is what a lot of people will say. But yeah, I will agree. I've been complacent. I've been stuck. Stuck is getting worse, as I showed you in the plan. And this bottom part here is where resiliency training comes in. 13-week resiliency training program. And one other word for resiliency is conflict resolution. Conflict occurs when two people with different points of views, right?
Share the truth
Start
with
to
each other.
share the truth with each other. Think out loud, and how to resolve that is something that is very important. And if you don't know how to do that, it makes it very difficult to work in teams. On the flip side, when you're getting better, right? Talk about fear and greed motivates us, both of them. There is a 13-week toughness training program. The Vice Chief of the Navy calls toughness different than resilient. Resiliency is being able to take that punch. Think of taking mental blows and mental punches, oftentimes called criticism, or someone arguing against your opinion. That's resiliency. I can take that. Toughness is being able to come back and fight. Fighting and smart fighting to win. Risk-taking done wrong is being reckless. We're talking about taking, big, ambitious goals and doing it smartly. And that's risk-taking. So really quick, a litmus test for being resilient or not. This is a great diagram where if you've just started a job, if you ever want to start a business, or if you ever read startup CEOs and when they have their business plan, before they launch, this is how they feel on the left. This is I have the best idea. In fact, I don't want to share it because it's such a good idea. And you believe you're going to get to this place where this is one of the things I'm most proud of, right? This idea, this job that I just landed, this promotion, it's going to make me blossom to be the best part of my whole life. Well, underneath, this is what it really looks like. This will be fun. This is harder than I thought. This is going to be a lot of work. This sucks, right? I have no idea what I'm doing. And people want to cross this swamp, right? As in, who wants to go in the dark swamp of despair? Brene Brown did a Netflix special, is actually a very close friend of hers as well. And she talks about the need to go into the swamp. And she says, don't plan to make your home and live in the swamp, but you got to put your galoshes on and be prepared to spend some serious time in the swamp because it is something that surrounds all of us. And there's no bridge to cross it. But if you're able to go through the swamp and to the other side, hey, you know what? It's not as bad as I thought, still sucks. Quick, let's call it a day and say we learned something. You keep pushing, hey, wow, eventually you get here. When you think about resiliency, it's the ability to resolve conflict with other human beings, think out loud, and maneuver your way through the dark swamp of despair. Most of us do this. This is called conflict avoidance. This is a very easy litmus test. If you find yourself, in difficult situations, prickly eggshell situations with other human beings doing this red arrow, you usually tend not to have a lot of resilience. People who are good at going through, and this is not to say argumentative, but good at going through and getting to the other side tend to have strong resiliency. So once again, we'll send you copies of all these slides and videos of the whole thing too. So there's a 13-week resiliency program we built, and it kind of goes in different steps. The real key in the resiliency program is this, dial down. We call it a red arrow behavior. And what's fascinating about resiliency, so at 3 o'clock, we're teaching a session, and we have walk-ins available as well. If you want to join, we're going more in-depth on the resiliency side. This is, say, me in the middle. There's a red wall I create by putting out these red arrow behaviors. And what I'm doing in essence is this, right? And the question you have to get to is, what am I doing to make it difficult for people to tell me the truth? There's a whole worksheet and program built and some examples of common things. When someone says, I think you can do better. And they're like, but I tried my best. That's a hard person to give any feedback, any reaction to. Or, when you have meetings and someone asks you, how are you doing? Good. How's the job? Good. How's your job? Good. Well, conversation over. We're back to org silence.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions? Nope. Got it. Right. Is it clear? Crystal clear. Got it.
These red arrow behaviors are so baked into our rituals, we don't even recognize. The reason we are not even in the arena when it comes to mental resiliency, as in dealing with the blows, criticism, conflict, is because we have made pretty damn sure that it can't come to us. We have made it difficult for people around us to tell us the truth. It's what we call eggshells. As a result of it, we built an eggshell farm all around us, and everyone has to tiptoe around, because the minute it comes to that difficult topic, we have put a signal. Nope, I'm fine, I'm good. No, I don't need to hear it. Like, I'm totally fine, right? I'm trying my best. You can't expect better than this.
Is it live?
There's a great individual by the name of Peter Gorman. We'll have him speak at one of these COAs. He's a self-made billionaire. He invented the heart rate monitor that goes in Polartec, but he built this other machine called the Optogate, these blue strips. It combines the lens from the Hubble telescope with lasers from ski racing, when you kind of have ski racing marks. And so instead of looking a billion light years away, it looks at the human body. And it's just measuring your gait when you walk. And he called feedback the second screen. If you are able to see the proper way you're supposed to walk and the balance you're supposed to find, you will actually correct almost everything wrong physically. So he has helped prevent sports injuries, working with some of the greatest sports teams, Olympic athletes, but he has two individuals. These are like real people that were paralyzed neck down. And after 6 years of rehab in the best medical centers, and they were told you can never walk again. Different injuries. One's a football injury. The other one was a metal plate that rusted in their brain. Never walk again. In 90 days, he got them walking again. And one of them is now running marathons. And so when Megan and I spend time with this guy, we call him Doc. How'd you do it? What was the magic trick? He's called the miracle of Mahopac. Mahopac, New York is where he lives. He said, Charlie and Megan, like, you know, people are wired to do the right thing, but we often don't know what right is. We're actually wired to self-correct as even human beings. But when you hurt your right leg, we tend to limp on the left. And it's very hard to understand that pushing through the pain on your hurt foot is the only way you heal properly. But we keep limping on the left, and that imbalance makes the injury worse and worse. That notion of being able to see what you're doing wrong despite the pain in real time is what he called feedback, or he called a second screen. And that's what this blue strip does. Getting feedback, real-time truth from the people closest to us will get all of us to get to the right decisions and the right calls. But because we make it difficult for people to give us feedback, it leads to many bad things.
Okay, this is the last page we had. The group we're speaking to at 1, and I think we've been hearing this as a trend. Everyone just sort of asking for, put all else aside, some practical tips of, you know, no, even prior to COVID, but with COVID, this extra sense of what do I do? How do I run my organization? So some of you are running really large organizations or huge teams. So what do I do to run my organization better, run my teams better? And even at the family level, whether you have kids or spouse or you're taking care of other people, depending on your situation. So we just put up, we thought, we're thinking through this, and some of the best advice that we can give, some practical tips for how to manage through this. And in this grid, you're looking at start and end. We talk a lot about how you start and end anything matters a lot. It's like disproportionate. So the impact that you can have and how you start and how you end. And related to the notion of weekly battle rhythms, weekly rituals and habits that you build, these habits, these rituals that you build now and the discipline you bring in now, especially during COVID, is even more important, because it's just so easy to kind of break all of our good habits and good routines that will keep us healthier mentally, physically, emotionally, all of that. So at the high level of the start and end, so at the org level as a company, how we start Mondays versus Fridays. Mondays is the tough stuff. Mondays for us has always been hard. We call it like swamp day. Charlie and I, we share an office, and I know that's really hard for people now being over a VTC all the time and video calls, but we work on ourselves very hard on Monday, as opposed to trying to get to that hard stuff, working on ourselves by Friday. Nobody has courage on Friday to open up a can of worms and have disagreement. You just won't do it. I don't care how strong you are. It's not going to happen. It's almost the weekend. So on Monday morning, first thing, we go into the tough stuff. Conflict, a lot of conflict. Usually by 12:30 is where we start to come to the other side. We have a staff meeting, but Monday nights is where we truly get to work on the kind of the risk taking, all the toughness we need to get done. But it's because we start hard on Monday morning. So that's really important, working hard on yourself Monday morning. Towards the end of the week, the opposite end on Fridays, we call it Coronitas. You can call it whatever you want. We have the little beers, the little Coronas, but again, virtually it's much harder to do. You can see it today, how we do it at 5. We're going to run a session to show you what we do, but it's all around servant leadership. This is all about recognizing people who helped you succeed. The question is, who helped you succeed this week? You can always come up with, even if it's so tiny, so little, somebody helped you succeed this week. And by putting in an hour on every Friday afternoon, we do ours at 5 o'clock, where it's just a small recognition ceremony, but it's very light. Who helped you succeed? And it's quick, rapid fire. And you'll see this again if you want to today at 5 o'clock. But it's connectedness. It's bringing the team together. Start really hard in the week. You end recognizing people who helped you as a great way to bookend your weeks. At the team level, something that's interesting with conferences and video calls, I've noticed, I really struggle with this, and I think it breaks down relationship building, is there's no warm up and cool down to video calls. It's like the meeting starts, we're all on, let's go. And then when the meeting ends, you just click leave meeting. It's very uncomfortable. I think the first few weeks of COVID, I recognize this because it just feels very cold. It's not warm. If you can get on a little bit earlier and just get to, and I say chat, a lot of people say, I don't have time for chat. Well, you need to make a little time for chat right now during COVID because everybody is feeling disconnected. So if you can even just ask them where they are, how they're doing, if you get a little bit of what's on their mind, even before you get going, for you, it'll warm you up as the presenter, but it'll also get your team feeling more connected. And at the end, you can keep some calls open. I know we feel we're all back to back to back to back, but sometimes just giving somebody 2 more minutes of your time after most people leave, you can say a few of you if you want to stay on, and leave it open for a few minutes because whoever leaves a real in-person meeting where everybody, it's like the meeting's over, goodbye, everybody splits. I mean, there's always stragglers and a few people will talk or in the hallways, chat a little bit about what just happened. How to set that up is important. And
when you think about it, we give a lot of presentations in different organizations. Afterwards, people always come up asking a few more questions.
But you don't get that with this situation.
On this digital side, it'd be like as if everyone, like Star Trek, disappeared like in a second.
It's awful, right? So we think that's important. And we're still working through some of those nuances, but it's an important piece of relationships. And then at the family level, kids, spouse, I think this can apply everywhere. So and we say again at the start, this idea of first impressions really matter. So, you know, when you wake up, how you greet your spouse, how you greet your kids, when you get home, first thing you say to them, again, that's a start. You're home now. No, you're actually already home. So, or you come into the other room, but how you greet them, how you talk to them, and what you do matters a lot. So this program called Sweet 16, I've been doing this since my 10-year-old now is, a few years old. The idea that you can bring 15 minutes of your full engaged self, as in like when you're fully on fire, your awesomeness, you can bring it for 15 minutes. You could be as exhausted, and that's a lot of work we did with Jim Lear, who's a performance coach, wrote 18 bestsellers. He talks about this notion of engagement. When you're fully on, you're bringing and this is the Sweet 16, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Those are the 4 pieces that you need to bring. And you need to score a 4 across all of those 4 dimensions. That's 16. You can bring it. 15 minutes, anybody can do anything because you can run 2 back-to-back marathons. If somebody said to you, your family will perish, they're at the end of that, you will do it. You will find a way. So don't tell me for 15 minutes you can't bring it. Now, the key to this to me is do something that engages you and fires you up so that you can fully bring it. So for example, I like to dance. If I go in and my kids are dying to see me and I'm like, ugh, well, they want to play Monopoly, can I find a way to fire up to play Monopoly? Yes, I could. But if you can find something that has like a kind of a hack that you really like to do, like I like dancing, I can insert a dance party and make it fun for them for 15 minutes, all in. And they remember that and they feel that more than anything else. And then they go back to iPad or doing whatever they're doing, but you brought 15 minutes and they will remember that. Same thing with your spouse, your 15 minutes conversation. If you can be all in just for 15 minutes, it makes a huge impact. And this can apply to anyone, anywhere.
And the research on the Sweet 16 side, the flip side is kind of interesting because oftentimes when we are done with work, we're done off a tough meeting, you know, your kid turns to you, and kids are just kids. But your reaction is, what? What do you want? And the reaction they believe is not that work has made you stressed.
Yeah.
They believe they make you stressed.
Yeah.
They believe they make you angry, upset. And that is the impression they take away. Versus your ability to deliberately inject when they see you, that 15 minutes of Sweet 16. And literally you'll see, they'll go back to whatever they want to do. But they will say, when my dad, when my mom, sees me, right? Or my spouse, or you know, it could be a parent. When they, like they are on fire, and that is the association. And oftentimes we'll joke around before we had COVID. Sometimes before you walk in your door outside, you have to go.
It's like
all right, I'm about to go in 15 minutes. They're going to get me like all of them.
It's like you have to like stretch before you're like going to like run a marathon, and then do the deep breath and then walk in like full of energy, full of life. Like I said, 15 minutes. Songs like Party Rock, Alexa, put on Party Rock. It just gets you going, stuff like that. You can do whatever you want. At the end, the best part of my day, worst part of my day question. This is ideally right before bed, not at dinner. This is the notion of being able to talk about what's going on with you. Ideally, it's the worst part of your day stuff because there's a lot of negative stuff. They talk about how, and Jim Lear talks about how bringing it to light. If you can just talk out some of the stuff that's going on that might be negative, is usually solving for half of this. It's like half the solution. You know, we think that we can't solve it. Nobody else can solve it. Why bother talking about it? But talking about those things is a big part of the solution. And it also makes other people feel less alone when you do. So this question I've been asking my 7-year-old now for at least 5 years now, since he was really little, he was like 2 years old, is what was the best part of your day? What's the worst part of your day? Ideally, this is in the dark, in bed with a spouse, with kids after you read to them, or it could be taking a walk. And the notion is shoulder to shoulder versus eye to eye. It's really hard to have conversations like this at the dinner table and bright lights, everybody listening. It can work up to that, but it's difficult to get to that, especially the worst part of your day. And that's the real toxic stuff that you want them to get out. So what was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? If they're not sharing anything, you might need to go first. And obviously this will take back and forth, and you don't need to solve anything. It's just bringing that stuff to light is a great hack. So hopefully this helps you guys.
And a quick thing on this worst part, it's fascinating what happens if you do this consistently. Bad things that happen in our life, we tend to want to forget it, ignore it. And that's what we call conflict avoidance. Even for children.
I think somebody needs to mute. I don't know, Daryl, if you can force mute.
But so what ends up happening in the worst part is that you start to look. Sorry guys, I don't know who's not muted, but so throughout the day, you're looking for the top of your list of worst things that occurred. You see something, instead of avoiding, you're like, that trumps the last worst thing that happens. That's the one I'm going to share. And it's amazing what happens when you get in this consistency of sharing this with a family, with other people. Even children start to look. And instead of being ashamed of the worst thing that happened, they're like, oh my God, that's a good one. That one is definitely the worst I'm going to bring up.
And they need to see that you also have worst parts of your day. I remember what my son said, Mom, did somebody bully you today? You know, it was after an academy. Somebody was really mean, giving me critical feedback, you know, and so I just had a hard day. And he's like, did somebody bully you, Mom? You know, and I think it's like they feel less alone when they see that you're struggling too and things. So these are our practical tips, our hacks, start and end.
Maybe take some questions. I don't know if anyone, if you want to raise your hand.
A few minutes.
Charlie, Megan, I see that Linda Wackman had a question on chat. If she'd like to come off the mute.
Yeah, Linda, can you just unmute yourself and?
Sure. Hey, good morning. I was curious, you know, actually this was a fascinating presentation and I got a lot out of it. I asked both of you as leaders of your organization, do you feel that you've lost some sort of your culture in this crisis? Has it morphed into something else, or has it stayed the same? I think venues like this is huge for an organization, keeps you connected and learning and doing things. But just curious what you think in your organization and what you plan to do when you get back to work. And
So-
all face to face.
So, I mean, it's been obviously just crazy for so many of us. And we were saying, I mean, sorry, I get emotional thinking about it. I think the first staff meeting we have back where everyone's back in the office, I think is going to get emotional.
Mhm.
It's crazy. I know we all have colleagues. Maybe you're like happy you don't see them all the time now. But, you know, as time passes, I'll be honest, I miss all of them. And there's 4 of us that hunker down in this office.
Yeah.
And I think the camaraderie you miss. And just last week, Jing's birthday?
Yes.
Last week,
Yeah.
one of our employees, she's alone, has been alone in her apartment for 5 weeks. It's her birthday and she's sad. And, you know, she lost friends and parents in Wuhan, you know,
She's
where the whole
from
thing
Wuhan,
started.
Yeah.
And so like the team like changed their Zoom
Background of the
backgrounds to
Zoom.
happy birthday.
Yeah.
We sang songs and she was bawling and it was just, it felt really good.
Yeah.
And I think that it's amazing how much little actions that you need to do to just go the little extra way. Then someone went and, you know, we found like her mother who sent a video recording to surprise her with, and then we found her best friend and she was like, how'd you get those? And we're like, well, we know the CIA and people that we know that can get us recordings. But like just ways to kind of create humor and fun. And I think that,
But I do think it's morphing a little bit. I mean, the first few weeks, Linda, it definitely felt like, you know, losing culture. Yeah. Like we're trying to figure out what to do now. Everybody's at home. We're here. And how do we make this work? And do we have enough food? And I mean, I was scared.
But it was interesting
But-
that the very first week that happened, the first few days, people were raving about how great it is.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Working from home.
So
commute.
productive.
Yeah.
Right? Like I like, you know,
Yeah.
not bothered by people, right?
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is this tactical work that you just, it's a clear understanding of what to do
Mhm.
is actually easier solo.
Mm-hmm.
It's creative work that's tackling uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
gets near impossible solo. You're like in your head trying to think, how do I solve this thing that's like a giant Rubik's Cube? And this is where you need team. And that is where it's become very challenging. And so the thing that we had to work on was helping people move into this asynchronous mode of working. So we don't even recognize how synchronous we are when we work in physical presences together in an office. So creating asynchronous work, we can spend a whole session just on that topic. We talk about high-level strategy, mid-level, and low-level, and how to get it right is getting that mid-level. Just enough that you have enough ownership and you're not dependent on anyone, but so you're connected, but you don't have dependency. So you can run. And so figuring that out at an org chart level and getting it right job-wise can make organizations significantly more productive.
But I do, Linda, I think it's a great question because I think it's making us more efficient. I mean, we're finding a lot of stuff that's happening doesn't need to happen, you know, especially like stuff in running the offices. We're here realizing, whoa, we don't need to do that. We don't, anyway, if we're cleaning out closets that we're like, God, this is it. Anyways, point being, there's a lot of stuff that I think we don't need to continue to do. So I think we're going to get more efficient and figure out what works and doesn't work, I think, because of video. And so I think a lot of those things will remain after. But my God, are we going to appreciate having everybody back? And it'll be amazing. Yeah, we're looking forward to
But the other
to
part we
something.
found was this around health, personal health. I think personal health, I think there's a session we taught one of the COAs on sort of like digital, I forgot what the topic was, but the fact that we're way too wired.
Yeah.
We found people, I mean, there's so much noise. They're looking at email,
Slack,
WhatsApp,
yeah.
Slack, and everyone feels they're missing out on something. The idea of silence that, wait, I haven't heard and something's going on that I'm not part of is actually creating tremendous anxiety of being like, in military, they call it calmed out. You're out of the loop in communications.
Mhm.
Some of it is manufactured and self-made. The other part is that it's impossible to over-communicate. You know, there's too much going on. So then you have inboxes flooded and everyone can't distinguish when's work and when's home. And it's blending in. Someone said, basically, I jump on my phone starting at 9 a.m. and I'm on till 2 a.m. straight.
Mhm.
And then I start again. Like, and I think that's a very common thing. And so what we found was people forgot to literally eat, exercise, drink water, hydrate. We just learned from the Air Force that I guess they train in boot camp that dehydration shows up 3 days later. So if you're not drinking enough water today, the problems of that show up 3 days later. And so there are many things that people are just doing poorly. And so we start to bake in other routines, like even having this Thursday on the weekends. Now we have a 2 o'clock workout that's done by a head of wellness video for everyone to dial in. And you know, it's like a 45-minute, one is more cardio on Saturday. The other one is more, you know, yoga, stretching, Pilates like.
And everybody feels like a satellite office now, as opposed to it used to feel New York headquarters. I know a lot of you have that, headquarters versus satellite. Everybody is satellite. And I think it's made us connect more. Boston, New York, London, San Francisco for us, like we feel more connected as a whole team over video. So I think that is a benefit, right? Where you are on the location just doesn't matter because we're all separated. So I think there's been some really great benefits to having the video. Yeah.
Tony, you had a question? Tony Burgess?
Yeah. Let's see.
You want to unmute yourself and.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, you know, just one of the things that I've been just so blown away by is ritualizing habits, the way that you have to enact the values and the culture. It's just exemplary. And I talk about you all the time with people. I'm wondering about the key rituals that have really been crucial in creating your groove, so to speak. Are you able to still nail those?
Yeah.
And also I'm curious, maybe for another time, are there any new rituals that are emerging
Yes.
that you're thinking, wow, these might be rituals we want to actually keep in place after COVID? We might not have even discovered these without this current situation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's fascinating. I think, Tony, I see in the comments you asked about, for example, Tony's in West Point?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
West Point. Yeah.
West Point,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So you asked about TPs. We have these,
Yeah.
we call talking partners, eventually
Training
upgrades to training partners, people in twos.
Yeah.
So what was interesting was this, we realized and recognized people by default had new TPs, new training partners. It was their other adult at home.
Roommate,
Sometimes
spouse,
a
parent.
meaning that, you know, when you leave a meeting and you're all huffed up,
Yeah.
someone asks, what happened? What'd you do? And the person asking you questions and you talking out, they're influencing your judgment and your processing and making sense of that. And people were not recognizing that was happening. So that was something that was kind of a new insight that we now actually work is at home,
Right.
and the adult you're talking to is influencing how you're processing what happened at work.
And what to do about that? No, we're saying you have to first recognize that, right? Because they're not looking through the same window that you're looking through. So they're just getting pieces of it. So it's just to be aware that there could be a blind spot there, that you're just acting with that you're being influenced for right or wrong.
There's a couple of rituals that we had wanted people to do for a while and it wasn't consistent, that has become incredibly consistent with this COVID situation that I think hopefully will stick afterwards. So one of the rituals for everybody working, there's only 4 of us in the office here, 2 in Boston, and everyone else is working from home, London, San Francisco, Boston, and New York. And so everyone working from home, March 6th, 13th is when we did our first work from home test, not realizing shelter in place would occur over the weekend. And so then starting that Monday, just the test turned into a permanent thing for everyone. But what we made a rule on was this: if you work from home, you need to fire off a daily summary. And so we can share the templates if you're interested. It's a short template of basically what you accomplished, right?
For the day.
For the day.
What challenges you have, and any kind of reminders, questions, challenges. But it's like very short and brief bullets.
And then what's pending. So it's like really short parts. And what it did was keep accountability, because what we found a lot of people do is, wow, I worked such a long day and I feel so much stress, but I feel like I got nothing done. And this self-accountability, not only to yourself, but to a colleague, to a manager, was actually very important at a daily level. And so what was interesting about that was this: you will quickly find, especially as a manager or a mentor or a coach, that the list starts to get unwieldy to truly digest. It gets so tactically based. There's so much noise and so much to read. You can't possibly even micromanage or digest what's in there. So there's a separate process. We call it On My Mind. So we built a tool. But
Tony just mentions it, OMM, yes.
So we call it OMM, right?
It's very effective.
And so we built an app for this, but we started initially with email, which is emailing at least one other person what is on your mind. And the process is to pick 3 emotions, right? So all our emotions fall either green or red. And it's fascinating why 3, because we're always in balance in one direction. Am I more positive or more negative? And that trend over time is important. So by the way, we're going to make that On My Mind app also available. So through COVID, the things that are helping us run our company, including the feedback app, we literally are releasing it, even though like we have enterprises that pay for it. We're releasing it so everyone can use it because we think these are critical things to help. So On My Mind is in the process of getting there too. But what it does is that's where the signal is higher than the daily summary noise. When people say, you know what, I am frustrated, but I'm also excited and I'm worried. And then they write a few bullets of kind of what's on their mind. It's a literally, it should be a few minute exercise. And that occurs on Mondays, on Wednesday, and then end of the week, which could either be Friday night or Saturday.
We used to only require it twice a week. So it's start and end, right? The tips we just gave you, the start and end matters. So beginning of the week, end of the week, but we added that additional one in the middle of the week now that everybody's working from home. It's been really helpful as a leadership to get a pulse on where everybody's heads are.
And more importantly, you can feel the trends of your people. You can see the issues brewing, or you can see their, overexcitement brewing, and that provides a signal to say, well, maybe I should go read the daily summary. Like they're worried about something and they're doing something, and so that course correction, the adjustments before accidents occur, or something good to do a lot more of and leverage further. The On My Mind as a leader or a manager is the best tool to give you a view of what's happening. And then the daily summary is more the tactical if you need to jump in. So that is something that probably became we did it, but now we do it just as 100% level, and it's making a huge difference just across the company. But it's actually how we found out about Jing's birthday.
Right.
She wrote that she's sad because
she's
she
alone.
had to celebrate
It's her
alone.
birthday. It's like boom.
It bubbled up rapidly, and
But then
really,
how nice when you already have a ritual scheduled for the end of day that Friday. So you just bake in things like that, life events, celebratory things, buzz, will help you succeed. And if you come today at 5 o'clock, you'll see the structure for that end of week. There's a lot of pieces that we add in there, but it's still, it's less than an hour, and it just moves because it's organized prior to that meeting, but it's a kind of a process that's just always happening.
By the way, I know we went over, so if anyone has to go, you can go, but we're good till at least 12:15. So but maybe one other thing, Tony, to add. So we talked, I think, in one of the earlier sessions, if not, we will, this notion of puzzling. If you ever look at and see anyone who does puzzles, right? They have like what you want, your goal out, but then they put it somewhere very central. Like my wife and my sister, they love puzzling, like 2,000 piece puzzles, 4,000 piece puzzles. And they always take the most prominent area of the kitchen, like the island, and half of it goes to puzzling when we go on vacation. And I'm like, really? Like, that's like, and the reason is because you have to constantly be looking at it. And sometimes you have these runs and breakthroughs, and sometimes you just do nothing. And this idea that difficult problems, we think we can solve difficult problems simply because we've scheduled time to solve it. Let us meet Friday at 4, and we will deal with the strategic issue we have in the Coast Guard. Boom, right? Let us all get together in a meeting, come prepared, and we'll just solve it then.
Yeah.
And we all know it doesn't work that way. Breakthrough thinking, solving difficult challenges, the really big stuff is a continual process. Breakthroughs occur when you least expect it, which is why setting yourself up to have the breakthrough is the key. So think like puzzling. And so the key asset is using your physical wall. And we've done this for years, but most of our leaders wouldn't adopt it. They're now adopting it at a different level. Everyone at home, I know it's hard, but taking pieces of paper and tape, puzzling on the wall.
We're embarrassed of our puzzles, but we'll reveal some puzzling.
I mean, so
we're trying to hide the messiness.
But the process of being able to share that wall, but for you constantly, and it needs to be in your visual sight. So this is, wherever you sit, it's got to be something you're looking at all the time. So wherever you're doing your work, so like some people, if you're in the kitchen doing your work, it might be using like a wall. But the bigger the wall, the greater the problems you can solve. This idea that like puzzles, and if you ever watch someone puzzle, they first try to do the simple stuff, the edges. Yeah. Then they concentrate on something like maybe there's only a few blue pieces. And the notion of puzzling is very apropos of how to do strategy and how to do things that are very difficult to solve. And so that is something that we shared and talked about. No one did. Mm-hmm. We see them doing it now like crazy.
Yeah, it's true.
as opposed to holding everything in your head.
Mhm. Is there any other questions in terms of what steps now? I think Jeff asked next after this training. Look, we'll do this every week, and we're trying to evolve the sessions based on what people are asking to hear more about and kind of what we're learning during every week. Today at 3, we're going to actually teach resiliency training today. So we're going to go into more depth around this Monday training program we have, where it's a 13-week resiliency training, and then at 5 o'clock you can come in and see how we do the recognition ceremony, the Coronitas.
The other thing we have is this. So over the last 6.5 years, we built running every other month, starting every month, and then eventually every other month. We would train somewhere between 100 to 200 leaders physically in our offices for 3 full days. A lot of the people here from the military and different organizations, education and whatnot, have come. And so we have a database of over 2,000 of some of the most impressive leaders in the world across every industry imaginable. You're talking medicine, Olympic sports, and professional sports teams, the CIA, Department of Education, charter schools, nonprofits, startups, Fortune 500. And so we have just given to them forever. But the knowledge that they have shared back with us is unbelievable. People who are curing autism to people who have taken there's rehabilitated, convicts to now become entrepreneurs. Crazy stuff. So they have asked, and they're coming to teach in COA. So we have some cool people. Literally, we just sent 12 emails last night asking them, we want you to teach. And they all of them wrote back saying, yes, schedule me next week and week after. We have the 3-star inspector general, formerly from the Navy, who wants to share leadership lessons he learned running a 5,000 person, ship to
Aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carrier. We have the head of data science from the New York Times who wants to share, what they're seeing and learning through data mining from the New York Times, which is kind of a pretty cool thing. We have such cool different groups coming in. So the accumulated knowledge we've had the benefit of receiving, that phrase of the more you give, the more you get. We found that phrase is not true in the short run, but it is true in the long run. If you're willing to play the long game, there are people that we have helped 5, 10 years ago who are now coming back saying, you've changed my life, helped me so much, I want to help. And we're like, I thought it didn't even matter because you disappeared. But sometimes the you give and you get comes back 5, 10 years later. And so we have a plethora of that coming back at us. So I know some of you in here in this room are doing amazing. I see Chris Nemi, we want you to come teach different components. And I heard, I think,
Paul Hammer, we think you should do a fitness class because we heard you're a workout king. So we're going to,
He's got everything type of workouts.
Yeah.
So someone mentioned Phil Tessa. So,
awesome.
Almost every TED Talk speaker is a close friend of ours. Phil Tessa mentioned Adam Grant. He's a close friend as well. So we'll bring different, speakers from the Bernays, the Simon Sinek's, the Adam Grants as well through this thing. And then we have an army of gig workers who we're paying to come and, just give them income. But whether it's fitness classes, teacher and student-led programs, so we've got a lot of stuff, kind of knowledge to bring. And I think we are making plans. This thing is growing pretty fast. This week, I think we had 13,000 people sign up for classes. That's from 1,800 last week, and we had a 6,000 person wait list. So we're growing those numbers, and our goal is to offer 100 classes per hour, oscillating between kids and adults, holding at least 1,000 people per class. So I'll be training around 1.2 million people in one Thursday. And there's other aspects of that we're going to build in, which is a young leaders program for both the adult side and the kids side. And we have a whole training program there we're building. This great basketball program called Steady Buckets.
And next week, I think it's Bring Your Child to Work Day. So for a lot of people, that's just you're at home with your child. So it'd be interesting to create some courses or classes that you can do with your kids more easily. It'd be really fun.
Yeah, so we have a sign language class where you can do Baby Shark and sign language with your kids that day. To we have this dance instructor for kids. She was the So You Think You Can Dance finalist in Greece, which we had an argument.
Very, very
it's
cool.
Still good, not same as US.
She's very cool.
But so she's just amazing as a kid instructor.
Laughing.
And so she will be teaching dance next week and have a session where parents and kids talk together. So it might be a duet routine.
Yeah.
So we're going to do some fun things like that as well. But
I think we should make it competitive.
we should probably make it competitive. We love to compete in everything. Ties are not acceptable,
No.
right? There's always
Somebody
winners
has
and
to win.
losers.
Yes.
But yes, so I think we went way over. We'd love to get some feedback from you guys. So we made the
Yeah.
app available, which by the way, we made it so that we took the internal version of the feedback app, which enterprises pay $100 per user per license. We just made it free for everybody. So because I think we think it will help you get and break org silence, which is harder in this window. So